Under the dim orange glow of the setting sun, the Mercy Hospital stood like a silent monolith, its red-bricked facade catching the last light of the day. The building had been there for nearly 80 years, a place where hope had once thrived in sterile corridors and the steady rhythm of medicine bottles clinking on metal trays. But in late 1949, whispers began to coil through the small town like smoke. Patients were entering the hospital but never leaving. Their families told of quick, merciful ends, from sudden illness, and then in the most unsettling detail of all, the bodies were never returned. Families received only urns, sealed, warm to the touch, as if the ashes inside had only just been removed from the furnace. At the time, Mercy was run by the Devan family, a lineage of physicians whose influence in the county was unmatched. Dr. Leonard Devan, the patriarch, was a man with the sharp jaw and immaculate suits of a war hero, though he had never fought in any battle. His 3 children, Walter, Amelia, and Richard, were all part of the hospital staff, each with their own specialty. Outwardly, they were the perfect embodiment of medical dedication, but within the walls of Mercy, something darker than illness was at work. The first confirmed family complaint came from a woman named Frances Morrow, whose husband, Gerald, had entered the hospital with a mild case of pneumonia. Frances swore he'd been walking, eating, and speaking when she left him that evening. By dawn, she received a call that Gerald had passed peacefully in his sleep. When she rushed to the hospital to see him, she was told his body had already been handled according to the patient's wishes and was presented with a polished oak box containing ashes. Gerald had never spoken of cremation, nor signed any such request. Frances screamed, protested, even threatened to call the sheriff, but Dr. Walter Devan simply guided her to the door, his gloved hand warm and firm on her elbow, his voice calm as water. "Your husband's pain is over, Mrs. Morrow. Let him rest." Within a month, more families began to murmur similar stories. Elderly patients, middle-aged accident victims, even 2 children who had been treated for minor injuries gone within days, their remains reduced to ash before any kin could verify death. At the time, cremation was not a common practice in that rural town. Most families preferred the tradition of burial, with wakes and closed coffins, yet the Devan-run hospital insisted the rapid handling of remains was a health necessity. The sheriff, Everett Cole, made a single inquiry, but was met with the hospital's impeccable paperwork. Death certificates signed, treatment logs filled, patient signatures on cremation authorizations. The problem was that none of the signatures looked quite right. To understand how this could happen, one must picture Mercy Hospital's basement. The upper floors were a theater of order. White walls, polished floors, nurses in starched uniforms, but beneath, in the low-ceilinged underbelly, was the furnace room. Officially, the furnace was for heating the hospital during the winter months, but tucked behind a partition was a second, smaller chamber, lined with fire brick, its blackened steel door marked with nothing but a brass plate bearing the Devan crest. The air here was different, thicker, with the faint, acrid smell of scorched linen, and something else, something that clung to the nose like a bad dream. Workers who came down to adjust the heating pipes spoke little of what they saw, for the Devan family did not take kindly to curiosity. It was in this very room, according to a night nurse named Helen Ashford, that the truth first began to take form. Helen had been working at Mercy for 6 years, and though she had grown accustomed to the occasional unexplained death, one winter night she was asked to deliver a folder to Dr. Amelia Devan in the basement. As she approached the partition, she heard voices, Amelia's calm clinical tone, and Walter's lower, urgent one, still breathing. Walter was saying, "We can't, we must," Amelia interrupted. "Father's orders, the fever will spread otherwise." "Fever?" Walter's voice had a hint of disbelief. "This one just has a fractured leg." There was a pause, then Amelia's voice again, sharper this time. "The chart will say otherwise. Now close the door." Helen froze. Moments later, she heard the metallic slam of the furnace door, followed by a muffled, inhuman cry that rose, wavered, and then cut off abruptly. Helen backed away, her heart hammering so loudly she swore the Devan siblings would hear it through the walls. That night she thought of resigning. But where would she go? The town's only other medical facility was 30 miles away, and the Devan's influence stretched far beyond Mercy's brick walls. By spring of 1950, the number of rapid cremations had climbed to 7. Most were recorded as dying from complications of influenza, pneumonia, or advanced infection, but oddly, none of these supposed outbreaks ever reached the general population. It was as though the sicknesses existed only in the hospital's records. Meanwhile, rumors festered. A grave digger claimed to have seen a smoke plume from Mercy's chimney in the middle of summer. A former orderly swore that he had delivered living patients, still groggy from anesthesia, down to the basement, and returned with only an empty stretcher. The real break came from outside the town. A visiting journalist from Chicago, Henry Lowry, had come to write about advances in rural medicine after hearing of Mercy's supposed high recovery rate. What he found instead were graves without bodies, grieving families with identical stories, and a hospital staff whose smiles were too precise, too controlled. Lowry requested an interview with Dr. Leonard Devan, who received him in a wood-paneled office, smelling faintly of antiseptic and cigar smoke. The elder Devan spoke of pioneering techniques and preventative post-mortem hygiene, insisting that Mercy's practices were years ahead of urban facilities. Lowry left with no confession, but a gnawing sense that something was fundamentally wrong. Lowry's curiosity deepened when he learned of the furnace. At night, he positioned himself on a hill behind the hospital, watching the chimney. Around midnight, a narrow column of smoke rose into the moonlight, carrying with it a faint but unmistakable odor. It was not the smell of wood or coal. It was sharper, greasier, and it turned Lowry's stomach. He returned the next night, and the next, each time at the same hour, each time greeted by that same awful plume. It was on the fourth night that he saw movement in the alley behind Mercy, 2 orderlies pushing a gurney covered in a white sheet, moving quickly toward a side entrance. The shape beneath the sheet shifted slightly, the curve of a knee lifting for a moment before falling still. Lowry froze, bile rising in his throat. He could not prove what he had seen, but he no longer doubted the townsfolk's whisper. The hospital wasn't just killing the sick, it was burning the living. When Lowry finally tried to confront the authorities, he found himself stonewalled at every turn. Sheriff Cole told him to mind his own city business, and even hinted that a tragic accident might befall him if he persisted. The townspeople, once willing to gossip, now looked past him on the street, their faces stiff with fear. And yet, Lowry wasn't alone. Helen Ashford, the night nurse, contacted him in secret. Her hands trembled as she slid a manila envelope across the diner table. Forged cremation orders, identical patient signatures, and charts showing healthy patients suddenly reclassified as terminal within 24 hours of admission. That night, Helen warned him of one more thing. "They'll know you're looking," she said quietly, "and if they know, they'll make sure you never leave this town." Lowry would soon learn that in Mercy Hospital, death was not an outcome of illness, it was the treatment itself. The next evening, Henry Lowry sat in his small rented room above the hardware store, the envelope of documents spread before him on the desk. The yellowed hospital forms smelled faintly of iodine, and each forged signature seemed to tremble under his gaze. He traced the ink of one patient's name, Thomas Halbrook, and compared it to the identical loops and strokes in a dozen others. No human hand could reproduce a signature so perfectly unless it wasn't human at all but a machine, a stamp perhaps. Lowry had no doubt now the cremations were deliberate, the paperwork pre-written. Outside, the rain began to fall in fine, whispering sheets. It pattered against the roof and blurred the gaslights along the street. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice, then fell silent. Lowry pushed the window shut, but the air in the room was still thick with that same sickly sweet tang he'd noticed near the hospital's chimney. The smell carried on the wind, seeping into every corner of the town like an invisible warning. Helen had agreed to meet him again, though she insisted it be somewhere far from prying eyes. The agreed-upon place was an abandoned railway shed on the edge of town. Lowry arrived first, his footsteps echoing in the damp hollow space. The smell of rust and old wood surrounded him, but beneath it, faint and unmistakable, was another odor, burnt cloth perhaps, or something worse. When Helen appeared, she was paler than before, her nurse's uniform hidden under a long gray coat. She glanced over her shoulder twice before speaking. "They've started watching me," she whispered. "I think Amelia suspects I know too much. She's been assigning me to the upper wards, away from the night transfers to the basement. But I hear things, Henry. I still hear." Lowry leaned closer. "What kind of things?" Helen's eyes darted toward the doorway as if the shadows might be listening. "Voices," she said. "Please." The sounds of fists on metal, and then nothing, just the furnace door. She handed him another folded paper. It was a list, names, ages, admission dates. At the bottom, scrawled in hurried pencil, were the words, "Scheduled tonight, D. Collins." Lowry's breath caught. Collins, David Collins, yes, 32 years old, broken collarbone from a farm accident. He was joking with the nurses yesterday. Tonight, they say he has lung complications. Henry, he's not sick. He's not even feverish. Something hardened inside Lowry. This was no longer about documenting a pattern. This was about stopping it before another person vanished into the fire. That night, the rain had stopped, but the streets were slick and black, reflecting the pale light of the moon. Lowry crouched behind a row of hedges, across from the hospital's side entrance. Midnight drew near. From somewhere deep inside the building came the faint hum of the furnace, steady, mechanical, patient. The door opened. 2 orderlies emerged, pushing a gurney draped in white. The sheet sagged over the unmistakable outline of a human body, and Lowry thought he saw the faintest movement beneath it. His hands tightened around the camera in his coat pocket. They wheeled the gurney down the ramp into the basement entrance. The heavy steel door clanged shut. Moments later, a low wail rose from beneath the earth, so faint it could have been the wind. Lowry knew better. He circled to the back of the building, where the narrow chimney rose like a blackened finger against the sky. At exactly 12:30, the first plume of smoke appeared, thin, gray, and curling into the night. He took 3 photographs, the flash dangerously bright in the darkness. Inside the hospital, a light on the 3rd floor flicked on, as though someone had noticed. Lowry didn't wait. He ran back to his room, heart pounding. The camera clutched like a lifeline. He knew he had enough to publish something. Names, documents, photographs of the midnight smoke. But as he rounded the last corner to the hardware store, he froze. The front door to his room was ajar. Inside, the lamp was still lit, casting a pale glow over the mess on the desk. The documents were gone, the envelope gone, the photographs from the first nights gone. Only one thing remained. A folded piece of Mercy Hospital stationery, resting exactly where the papers had been. In neat, deliberate handwriting, it read, "You can't cremate the truth, Henry, but you can burn the man who carries it." Somewhere in the distance, the hospital's chimney exhaled another ghost of smoke into the night. The note sat on the desk like a loaded gun. Henry Lowry stared at it for a long time, the words burning deeper with each passing second. The message wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. Someone from Mercy had been inside his room, close enough to touch the papers, close enough to know exactly what he had gathered. The thought made his skin crawl. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the wooden chair by the window, watching the dark street below, the lamplight glinting on the wet cobblestones. Every creak of the old building made him stiff. By dawn, his mind was decided. If he left the town now, all he would take with him was fear. The Devanese would go on, the furnace would keep burning, and David Collins, if he was still alive, would be reduced to another urn of anonymous ash. It had to end here. Lowry spent the day mapping out a way inside. Helen had told him that the basement door was watched at night, but the freight elevator in the back of the kitchen connected directly to the furnace level. During the day, it was used for deliveries of coal and linen. At night, it was unguarded, except for the kitchen itself. He would have to get in through the side pantry entrance, without being seen. Helen agreed to help, though the strain of fear was etched into her face. They met briefly in the alley behind the butcher's shop, where she handed him a hospital laundry uniform, wrapped in brown paper. "Wear this," she whispered, "and whatever you see down there, don't speak. If someone catches you, pretend you're delivering fresh. And Henry, if you hear the furnace door, don't get close." Night came quickly. At 11:30, Lowry approached the hospital from the south side, slipping through the narrow gap between 2 delivery wagons. The laundry uniform felt strange on him, too clean, too clinical.
and the cap itched his scalp. He pushed the pantry door open an inch at a time, holding his breath. The kitchen was empty, the long counters scrubbed to a dull shine, the air faintly scented with boiled cabbage. He moved quickly to the freight elevator, the wooden gate groaning softly as he slid it up. The chain rattled when he pulled it, the platform descending into darkness, with a shuddering hum. The basement air was different, thick, heavy and oppressive. The smell hit him immediately, stronger than it had been outside, a mixture of coal dust, scorched cloth, and that unmistakable, oily sweetness of burning flesh. He stepped off the elevator into a narrow corridor, lit by a single bare bulb. The sound of machinery throbbed in the distance, steady and deliberate. Following the corridor, he turned a corner and saw the partition Helen had described. Beyond it, the light glowed orange, flickering against the brick wall. Voices carried over the sound of the furnace. Two men, speaking in low tones. Orders came straight from Dr. Devanine. One said, "No exceptions." The other grunted, still breathing though, not for long. Lowry edged closer, keeping to the shadow. Through a narrow gap in the partition he saw them, two orderlies in stained aprons, standing over a gurney. The sheet was pulled back just enough to reveal the patient's face, pale, eyes half open, lips moving weakly as though trying to form words. Lowry recognized him instantly from Helen's list, David Collins. The orderlies each took an arm and began lifting him toward the furnace door. Lowry's heart pounded in his ears. He knew he couldn't overpower them, not without ending up on that gurney himself. His camera was in his coat, but to take a picture now would give him away. He had seconds to decide. Then from the far end of the basement, another door banged open. Dr. Amelia Devanine stepped in, her white coat immaculate despite the heat, her gloved hands clasped behind her back. "Make it quick," she said coldly. "We've another coming down in an hour." Lowry pressed himself flat against the wall, every muscle locked. He watched as the furnace door swung open, the orange light inside so bright it burned his eyes. The heat rolled out like a physical force, thick with the reek of charred bone and hair. Collins let out a faint, strangled sound, neither a cry nor a word, before the orderlies slid him forward. Lowry's mind screamed at him to act, but his body wouldn't move. The door slammed shut. The iron latch fell into place. The hiss of burning filled the air. When Amelia turned and walked back toward the far door, she paused for the briefest moment, her eyes scanning the shadows. Lowry froze, holding his breath. Then she continued on, the door shutting behind her with a click. The orderlies began sweeping the floor, as if nothing had happened. Lowry backed away, his hands trembling, his throat dry. He stumbled into the elevator, pulling the chain until the platform rose with agonizing slowness. Back in his room, he sat in the dark. The image of Collins's face burned into his mind. He had seen enough to damn the Devanines forever, but only if he could get the evidence out of the town alive. What he didn't yet know was that the Devanines were already preparing for him to disappear, and their furnace never slept. By morning the town felt different. The air carried the same burnt sweet tang from the hospital's chimney, but there was something else now, a pressure as if the entire place were holding its breath. Henry Lowry sat at the diner counter, nursing a cup of coffee gone cold, scanning the mirror behind the counter. Every time he looked, he caught the same thing, a man in a brown overcoat, sitting by the window pretending to read a newspaper, but never turning the page. Helen had told him to leave the town the moment he had proof, but leaving wasn't so simple. The early train out wouldn't arrive for another 18 hours, and in a place this small, he doubted the Devanines would let him sit quietly at the station. He paid for the coffee, stepped into the gray daylight, and started walking toward the post office. His plan was desperate but clear. Develop the photos from last night, write the article by hand, and send it to his editor in Chicago before anyone could stop him. But halfway down Main Street, a black Packard sedan rolled slowly alongside him. The passenger side window slid down. Inside, Dr. Walter Devanine smiled like a man greeting an old friend. "Mr. Lowry," he called, his tone warm but with a thread of something colder beneath it. "Why don't you join me for a drive? Just a friendly chat." Lowry didn't stop walking. "I've got business." Walter's smile never faltered. "Yes, I hear you've been very inquisitive. That can be dangerous in a place like this." The sedan eased ahead and stopped, blocking his path. Walter leaned out the window slightly, his voice dropping low. "You've seen things you shouldn't have. That means you have two choices. You can leave tonight, quietly, or you can stay and find out what it's like to wake up in one of our basement beds." Before Lowry could answer, Walter gave a small nod to the driver, and the Packard rolled away. Lowry watched it turn down the road toward Mercy Hospital, the taillights glowing faintly in the mist. His hands were shaking, but his mind was sharper than ever. The Devonines were rattled. If they were threatening him so openly, it meant they knew he had something worth silencing. By late afternoon, the man in the brown overcoat had been joined by another, this one in a flat cap, lingering outside the hardware store across from Lowry's lodging. When Lowry stepped outside with his camera bag, both men began walking casually in his direction. He ducked down the alley before they could close the distance. The alleys in this part of town were a narrow maze of wet cobblestones, leaning fences, and the smell of coal smoke. Lowry kept moving, cutting through a yard, scaling a low fence, and emerging on the far side of the block. He glanced back just in time to see the men split up, one heading toward the train station, the other toward the post office. They weren't just watching him, they were closing off every escape. Lowry knew then that he couldn't wait until morning. If he stayed the night, he'd vanish into Mercy's furnace before sunrise. He needed Helen's help one last time. When he knocked on her apartment door, she didn't open it immediately. Her voice came muffled through the wood. "Henry, you shouldn't be here. They know we've spoken." "I don't have a choice," he said. "They're following me. I need a way out tonight." The lock clicked, and Helen pulled him inside, shutting the door quickly. Her hair was unpinned, her eyes red-rimmed as if she hadn't slept. She listened as he laid out his plan to get the photographs and his notes onto the midnight freight train that passed through without stopping, tossing the package into the mailbag hook where the postal clerk could retrieve it miles down the line. "It's risky," Helen said. "Pace, you'd have to get near the tracks, and they'll be expecting you to run. Then I'll need a distraction," Lowry said. Her gaze met his, and in that moment he saw the decision form in her eyes. "Leave that to me," she whispered. At 11:30, Lowry crept through the outskirts of town toward the freight yard. The mist hung low, muffling his footsteps. In the distance, the faint clang of metal on metal echoed, the yard workers coupling cars for the night. He kept to the shadows, clutching the brown paper package against his chest. Then he heard it shouting, back toward Main Street, a woman's voice, Helen's, cutting through the night, followed by the sharp crack of something breaking. Lowry's gut tight. She was drawing them away from him, buying him minutes he didn't deserve. He reached the embankment just as the headlamp of the freight train appeared, a dull glow in the fog. The engine roared closer, and Lowry crouched, waiting for the right moment. But just as the train began to pass, a hand clamped down on his shoulder. Lowry spun, nearly losing his grip on the package. The man in the brown overcoat was there, face shadowed, breath hot with tobacco. "Going somewhere, Mr. Lowry?" Before Lowry could answer, another figure stepped from the darkness behind him, and in the faint light from the passing cars he saw the white coat. Dr. Leonard Devane himself stood there, calm and patient, as if he had all the time in the world. "I told you," the doctor said softly. "You can't cremate the truth, but we can burn the man who carries it." The train thundered past, each car taking with it Lowry's chance of escape. And somewhere behind the hospital, the furnace waited, its orange heart beating steadily in the night. The cold hands on Henry Lowry's arms were not just restraining, they were claiming. The man in the brown overcoat tightened his grip, and Dr. Leonard Devane gave the smallest nod. Without another word, Lowry was half dragged, half marched away from the freight yard. The sounds of the train faded into the distance, replaced by the steady rhythm of their footsteps, and the soft whisper of the mist closing in behind them. They didn't take him through Main Street. Instead, they cut through the alleys, avoiding lamplight, moving with the efficiency of men who had done this before. Lowry tried to gauge the distance by the turns, but the night disoriented him. He could have been anywhere in town, though the faint smell of coal smoke told him they were drawing closer to Mercy Hospital. The side entrance to the basement loomed ahead, a dark metal door streaked with rust. One of the men produced a key and swung it open. The furnace heat rolled out immediately, thick, oppressive, carrying that sweet, nauseating scent he would never forget. Inside, the light was dim except for the orange flicker spilling from the partitioned room. The air felt heavier here, as if every breath carried with it a piece of someone else's last moment. Lowry's mind raced. This was the same corridor he had taken the night he saw David Collins. They pushed him toward the partition, where two orderlies in stained aprons stood waiting. Leonard Devine followed at a measured pace, his hands folded neatly behind his back. "I admire your persistence, Mr. Lowry," the doctor said. "Most people learn the value of silence much earlier. You're burning people alive," Lowry said, his voice hoarse but steady. "You call it medicine, but it's murder." Leonard tilted his head slightly, as though considering the words. "Murder is a matter of perspective. We remove suffering before it festers. We prevent contagion before it spreads. We preserve the health of the many by culling the few." His eyes were sharp, unwavering. "It is not cruelty, it is control." Lowry struggled against the men's grip, but they forced him toward the furnace room. The heavy steel door to the crematory stood open, the fire inside pulsing with a deep, hungry glow. Heat prickled his skin from yards away, and every instinct screamed at him to run. Then from the far corner, a voice, "Stop." Helen Ashford stepped into the light, her coat half-buttoned, her hair disheveled. She was breathing hard as if she'd been run. "I'll do it," she said quickly, stepping closer. "Let me prepare him. It'll be easier." Leonard studied her for a long moment, and something cold passed between them. "You've been a loyal nurse, Helen," he said, "but loyalty is proven in fire. Do it." The men released Lowry into her grasp. Her fingers closed around his wrist, and she guided him toward a side room just off the main furnace chamber. The door shut behind them, muffling the roar of the flames. For a moment neither spoke. Then Helen turned to him, her eyes wide and urgent. "There's a laundry chute on the other side of this room," she whispered. "It drops into a coal bin in the storage yard. It's your only chance." Lowry's pulse kicked hard. "What about you?" She shook her head. "I'll keep them busy. Once you're outside, run to the old rectory at edge of town. There's a priest there, Father McNally. Tell him everything. He's the only one who's not afraid of them." The pounding of footsteps outside cut their moment short. Helen grabbed Lowry's shoulders, gave him one last look, and shoved him toward the chute. He slid the metal hatch open, the smell of dust and coal wafting up. Without hesitation, he swung his legs inside and dropped. The fall was short but jarring. He landed hard in the coal bin, the black dust clinging to his clothes and burning his lungs. Above he heard voices, Leonard's among them, calling for Helen. There was no time to see what happened next. Lowry scrambled out of the bin into the night air, the furnace smell still clinging to him like a second skin. The storage yard was quiet, shadows stretching long in the moonlight. He ducked between stacks of crates, keeping low, every sense straining for movement. Somewhere behind him, a door slammed open. A beam of light swept across the yard. The hunt had begun.
The night pressed in around Henry Lowry like a living thing, damp and cold, carrying the echo of voices calling his name from somewhere beyond the crates. He crouched low, listening. The crunch of boots on gravel was close, too close, and accompanied by the metallic rattle of something being dragged along the ground. The Devanets weren't just searching, they were hurting him, pushing him toward the open stretch of the yard, where escape would be impossible. Lowry bolted in the opposite direction, weaving between stacks of coal barrels and supply crates, his lungs burning from the dust he'd inhaled in the chute. A shout went up behind him, and a beam of light cut across the yard. The crunch of boots grew faster. At the far end of the yard, a low wooden fence separated the hospital's property from the back lot of a shuttered cannery. Lowry hit it at a run, vaulting over, splintering the top rail beneath his weight. He landed hard in the weeds on the other side, the impact jarring up through his knees. But he didn't stop. The cannery loomed over him, its windows boarded, its walls streaked with rust from years of rain. Beyond it, in the faint moonlight, he could just make out the silhouette of the old rectory, the steeple rising black against the cloudy sky. Father McNally's sanctuary was less than a quarter-mile away, but between him and that door was open ground, and the Devanese knew it. He skirted the cannery, keeping to the shadows. A sudden metallic clang echoed. One of the searchers had kicked over a coal bucket. Lowry froze, pressing himself against the cold brick. He could hear their voices clearer now, Walter Devaney among them. "He's headed for the church," Walter said. "McNally won't hand him over, so we'll make sure he never gets there." A second voice, Leonard's, answered with that same calm authority that had unnerved Lowry since their first meeting. "Cut him off at the field. The rest of you keep to the road. If he's desperate enough, he'll try to run for it. That's when we take him." Lowry knew he had only one advantage. They assumed he'd make for the road. Instead, he dropped low and moved through the tall weeds toward the tree line, where the field sloped down toward a drainage ditch. The wet grass soaked his clothes, the cold biting into his skin, but he forced himself forward. Halfway across, a light swept over the field. He flattened himself into the mud, holding his breath as it passed. The beam lingered for a moment, then moved on. From somewhere to his left, the sound of a dog barked twice. The ditch was deeper than he'd expected, the muddy sides slick under his boots. He slid down, wading through the shallow water, the smell of rot and algae heavy in the air. The voices were fainter here, muffled by the slope of the earth. He followed the ditch until it curved behind the rectory's property, where an old stone wall rose above him. The church loomed beyond it, dark except for a single lamp burning in the front vestibule. He climbed the wall, the stones wet and moss-slick, his fingers numb. At the top he risked a glance back. Shadows moved along the edge of the field, flashlights slicing the night. They hadn't seen him yet. Dropping down into the rectory yard, he crossed to the back door and knocked hard, his breath clouding in the air. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened a crack, and a gaunt man in a black cassock peered out. "Father McNally," Lowry rasped. "Helen Ashford sent me. I have to tell you." The priest's eyes narrowed slightly. "Inside, quickly." Lowry slipped through the door and McNally bolted it behind him. The air inside was warmer, scented faintly of candle wax and old wood. The priest led him into a small study, where stacks of dusty books lined the shelves and a crucifix hung above the desk. "You're not safe here," McNally said, his voice low, "but you're safer than you were a minute ago. Now tell me, what exactly did you see?" Lowry started to speak, but before he could form the words, there came a sharp knock at the front door. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. McNally's eyes went cold. "They've come." The priest crossed the room, taking something from a drawer, a heavy brass key, and pressed it into Lowry's hand. "Basement," he said quickly. "Trapdoor under the rug by the bookcase. Hide, and don't make a sound." Lowry knelt, pulling back the rug to reveal a small wooden hat. As the priest moved to answer the door, Lowry climbed down into the darkness, the key still warm from McNally's hand. Above, the hinges creaked, and the muffled sound of Leonard Devaney's voice filled the room. The trapdoor shut. Lowry was alone in the dark, and from somewhere deep in the rectory's basement, he thought he heard the distant hum of machinery, steady, rhythmic, and far too familiar. The darkness beneath the rectory was thick, pressing in on Henry Lowry from all sides. The air was damp, carrying the faint smell of mildew and cold stone, but under it, barely there at first, was something far more unsettling, the acrid sweetness he knew too well. His fingers brushed along the wall, tracing rough stone until they found the edge of a shelf stacked with dusty jars and candle stubs. Somewhere above him, voices murmured, Leonard Devaney's smooth tone and Father McNally's calm, measured replies. He crouched low, listening. "Only looking for a guest of yours," Leonard said. "A man named Lowry. You understand the urgency. This matter concerns the health of the entire community." "I have no such guest," McNally answered without a pause. "And even if I did, my vows do not permit me to betray a soul seeking sanctuary." There was a long silence, broken only by the faint creak of a floorboard. "Sanctuary," Leonard repeated, the word rolling like a challenge. "That's a beautiful thing to offer, Father, but it can be flammable." The voices moved away, toward the front of the rectory, but Lowry's attention was no longer on them. The hum he'd heard earlier was growing louder now, coming from somewhere deeper in the basement. Against all better judgment, he moved toward it. The floor sloped gently downward into a narrow passage. The walls here were newer, smoother, recently built. Unlike the old stone above, the hum became a low mechanical growl. When he turned the corner, the passage opened into a chamber lit by the orange flicker of fire. Lowry froze. It was smaller than the hospital furnace room, but unmistakably the same design. A steel crematory door set into the wall, its hinges blackened, its latch gleaming. Pipes snaked from it into the ceiling, carrying heat and smoke somewhere above, perhaps even into the hospital itself. In front of it stood a single gurney, and on it, a body under a white sheet. He stepped closer, hands trembling. The sheet was drawn up to the chin, and the face beneath it was slack, pale but not still. Helen Ashford's eyes fluttered weakly open, her lips parting in a faint rasping breath. "Henry," she whispered. He yanked the sheet back, horror tightening around his chest. "Helen, God, what did they—" "No time," she gasped. "McNally works for them. He keeps the ones they can't move through the hospital. I thought I could help you. They found out." Above, the muffled sound of a door closing echoed through the rectory. Footsteps began descending the stairs. Lowry scanned the room. Against the far wall, a narrow metal door stood ajar, revealing a short flight of steps upward, an escape hatch. He tried to lift Helen, but she was too weak to stand. "Go," she whispered, her hand clutching his sleeve. "If you stay, they'll burn us both. Take the key and tell the world." The footsteps were closer now, steady, unhurried. Leonard Devaney's voice floated down the stairwell. "Miss Lowry, I knew you'd find your way here. You've a nose for the truth. Unfortunately, you've also run out of doors to open." Lowry slipped the brass key into his pocket, his mind racing. He couldn't carry Helen, not without being caught, but he could take what she'd risked everything to give him. A leather-bound ledger on the table beside her, its pages filled with names, dates and false causes of death. 76 in all. He met her eyes for the last time. "I'll come back for you," he said, though they both knew it was a lie. Then he bolted for the metal door, slamming it shut behind him just as the basement filled with light from the stairwell. He climbed fast, lungs burning, emerging into the cold night air behind the rectory. The sounds of pursuit followed, but he didn't look back. He ran until the town was a smear of shadow behind him, until the smell of the furnace faded from his clothes, and the only sound was his own ragged breath. Somewhere ahead, there would be a road, and beyond that, a train. And in his pocket, the truth, 76, names that would damn the Devaneys forever. But as the wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest whiff of smoke, Lowry knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. Mercy Hospital's furnace would keep burning, until someone brave enough walked back into the fire. They still call it Mercy Hospital, though the wards are long empty and the windows stare blankly over the hills like sightless eyes. The brick has blackened with age, and the great chimney, once belching a steady choking plume, stands cold against the sky. Locals tell you it shut down because of funding, because modern medicine outgrew its old ways. They will not tell you that the ground behind it is laced with ash, that under a thin layer of soil lies the unmarked dust of 76 souls who were declared gone before they truly left this world. Henry Lowry's ledger made the newspapers briefly. There were investigations, denials, quiet settlements. Leonard Devaney's name vanished from public record, his properties transferred, his face disappearing into history's shadow. Father McNally was reassigned to a mission far away, and died there without ever speaking of the fire in his basement. The ledger is still out there, locked in a courthouse archive, gathering dust. Every name in it belongs to someone's grandmother, brother. None of their families were ever told the truth, and yet, sometimes when the wind cuts across the hills just right, the chimney exhales again, not in smoke, but in something colder, a faint breath, carrying the bittersweet stench of scorched linen and skin. Those who pass by at night swear they hear voices in the walls, not screams, not cries for help, just the soft pleading whisper of those who were told they were going home, only to wake in the dark, staring up at a furnace door. Mercy was only a word, and in that place, it was the last word they ever heard.